Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. So today we are at day 19 of our complete DevOps course, and in this video we will see practical implementation of Jenkins. So that's the reason why I call it Jenkins Zero to Hero. Right. So if you look at the about section, I explained what are we going to do today. That is install Jenkins, and then we will see how to expose this Jenkins to outside world. After that, we will see how to configure Docker as agent. We'll not create multiple EC2 instances and configure them as worker nodes to this Jenkins master, but we will see how to use Docker so that containers, as you know, they are very lightweight and they have a lot of advantages. So I'll try to explain why you should also follow this approach. So stay with me. It might be a little bit lengthy video, but try to follow the video till the end so that you will get a good benefit out of the video. And finally, we'll also see how to deploy these applications onto a Kubernetes cluster. So if you feel somewhere that you're not able to follow the video or I'm going little speed, don't worry. I've documented the entire things in the README section of this GitHub repository, right from installation to everything that we are going to today. So you can fork this repository or you can start this repository so that you can follow the video accordingly at your suitable time. Perfect. Now, firstly, what we will do is we'll start with an EC2 instance. If you see here, this is my AWS console, and I have already launched a EC2 instance. So there is no special requirement, but if you want to follow the document as is, so I have some commands that I've provided for you how to install Java, Jenkins and all. So if you want to follow the video as is, you can create an Ubuntu instance. So that all the apt commands will be applicable to your instance as well. So I just created a Jenkins instance, and what we will do is we'll try to start with installing Jenkins on it, right? The name is Jenkins, but it's just an EC2 instance without any software packages installed in it, right? So let me take the terminal, and firstly, what we need to do, we need to copy the instance public IP address. So I'll copy the instance public IP address, and if you see here, I have my console. Let me increase the font, right? So first of all, we'll try to SSH to that EC2 instance. Let me change the public IP address. So I'm using my key value pair, and I have SSH to that EC2 instance, right? So I am currently logged into the EC2 instance. Now, the first thing that you need to do is Jenkins is a Java-based application. Okay, so for that to be installed, you need to have Java as a prerequisite. So that is also provided in the document. If you see the prerequisite, Java or JDK is a prerequisite. So firstly, you need to run this set of commands. Okay, firstly, we are updating the apt packages, and then we are installing the JDK. So versions, okay. So if you want to go with the document, just use the commands as is, or if you have a requirement of any specific version, then you can change them as well. But I would recommend you to follow the versions as is, because I try to keep it as latest as possible. So this will just take a second, and after your apt get update is done and you have installed the JDK, you can verify if your Java is installed or not using this specific command. Once that is done, you can follow or you can copy the exact same command to install Jenkins as well. So I'll just copy the commands to install Jenkins. Let's say you are on CentOS or you are on different distributions of Linux. Don't worry, you can get the commands from official Jenkins documentation. So all that you need to do is just search for Jenkins here and go to the official documentation. Once you go there, click on the documentation option, and then you have installing Jenkins. And to your right side, you have options like Linux, Kubernetes, where do you want to install. So click on Linux and then choose your distribution. Let's say you're on CentOS. So you have commands to install Jenkins on CentOS, but the only prerequisite is you need to have Java installed on it. Okay, so we are installing Jenkins. Java installation is done. After that, you will have your Jenkins service started. Okay, right? So one thing is, even when we are talking about the AWS EC2 instances, you need to understand that by default, your EC2 instances will not accept traffic from external world. That is, the inbound traffic rules are blocked by default. So if you want to access any application, like Jenkins is an application which has its application running on port 8080. If you want to see that, what is the command? You can just say ps-ef and grep for the process called Jenkins, right? If you do that, you can see clearly that, okay, so Jenkins is running on this specific instance and the port is 8080, right? So port 8080 is not accessible to external world. AWS is blocking that on this specific IP address. So what you need to do is go to the security. Okay, if you see here, this is security, and click on the existing security groups. So these are the default security groups that are attached to your EC2 instance. What you'll do is edit the inbound rules. Inbound rules is nothing but the traffic that is coming inside or to your EC2 instance. Click on add a rule. What you can do is you can select custom TCP and select a port range. But in my case, I directly know the port, that is 8080. And this is very important. This is the source IP address. Let's say you only want this EC2 instance to be accessed from the laptop. You can use my IP. Let me put it as anywhere. And you can also, instead of custom TCP, you can allow all the traffic. Right now, I'll delete the instance after the usage, so I can allow all traffic and even allow everybody the source IP is 00, so that anybody can access this Jenkins instance. Okay, so most of the people might already know this process. So if you feel that you already know how to use this till this point of time, okay, pretty cool. The topics that we're going to cover after this might like it might be something that you might not be aware, like using Docker as an agent or deploying the applications onto Kubernetes. So stay with me and try to be focused on the entire video. Perfect. So right now I allowed the EC2 specific port range to be accessed from external world. If I go to the EC2 instance, select the public IP address, I just copied it. Now let me see if Jenkins instance is accessible or not. Okay, so I copied the IP address and the port is 8080. So let me even select that port and click on enter. Once you do that, yeah, right now you have Jenkins installed and Jenkins is running on this EC2 instance. So what Jenkins is saying, the initial password can be copied from this specific file. So I'll just cat that specific file and get the initial password. Okay, you need to use sudo because this is a root file location. What is happening? Okay, so let me do this sudo cat followed by the location of the file, and this is my initial password. I copied the initial password and pasted it here. Now I am able to sign into Jenkins. Okay, once you do this, you have two options. One is install suggested plugins and select plugins to install. Go with the suggested plugins because Jenkins has already categorized the most useful plugins. It depends upon the analytics, which plugins are most used. So Jenkins has come up with a list and Jenkins said that, okay, so these are the list of plugins that many people are using and even you, it might be useful for you. And at any given point of time, you can go to Jenkins and install any plugins that you want. While this is getting installed, let me tell you one more time, all of these things are available in the document. Like if you see here, this is how you copy the password and then you click on install suggested plugins. Then what you need to do after that. So everything is present as part of the GitHub repository. So you can clone or fork this repository. Perfect. Let me go back and see what is the status. So the plugins are still getting installed. If you feel that I don't want all of these plugins, it's wasting a lot of time for me, you can just go with install selected plugins as well. If you're going to use this instance for a long time, I would highly recommend you to configure the username and password. You can choose a easy one as well. And the reason for that is, this is your administrative password. The one that comes by default is like, it's like a test password, or it's a password that you can only use it. I mean, it's a password that Jenkins would recommend to change it in the future. So I'm sticking to my IP address and port and click on save and finish. Right? So start using Jenkins. That means your Jenkins installation part is done. So right now what we have done is we have installed Jenkins. Now, let me take a moment and explain you how Jenkins works in real time. I'm not going to talk about the pipeline. So because we already discussed about the pipeline, what is the orchestration in Jenkins, what are the different stages that you could integrate in Jenkins in the previous class. So I'm not going to talk it, but how Jenkins architecture works. That is, if you see here, usually to the left side. Okay, so to the left side of the diagram, I have a Jenkins master where the Jenkins is right now installed. So this EC2 instance that we are using can be considered as Jenkins master. And what usually happens is in an organization, let's say we are working for Amazon.com. So in Amazon.com, people create EC2 instance on Jenkins master. And because there are multiple developers, multiple project teams, and multiple development teams, so Jenkins gets a lot of load to offload these things. So what Jenkins does is you should always use Jenkins master only for the scheduling purpose. Okay, because all of the things cannot be run on a single Jenkins master, right? If everything runs on a single Jenkins master, then it will have conflicting packages. Let's say one team requires Java version 7 and the other team requires Java version, right? Sorry, 8. Someone requires Python 2, someone requires Python 3. So it is technically not possible to have everything to run in one Jenkins master. Not good for the purpose of load and not good even for the purpose of like dependency conflicts. So what people do is they create a Jenkins master and they create Jenkins worker nodes. Like let's say this worker node should be used by applications 1 to 10. This worker node should be used by applications 10 to 20, or this worker node should be only used by a specific development team, or this should be only for Windows applications. This should be only for Linux applications. So people categorize that. Who is responsible for these things? DevOps engineers are responsible for these things. But saying that, this architecture was well and good like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, but with the advancement of microservices, with the advancement of the Kubernetes microservice architecture, the problem is that you have different types of applications. Like the scale of your microservices has gone leaps and bounds. So with this approach, you might end up like, let's say this project team, okay, or the Windows applications Jenkins worker node, it is not at all getting any requests, or there is no change to the applications that are made. So always this EC2 instance is sitting idle. Let's say this is one EC2 instance and you have 20 EC2 instances as worker nodes. Okay, so whenever Jenkins master gets a request for Windows, what usually it does is because it says that okay, Windows should always go to Jenkins worker node 3 for execution of pipelines, it will only send Windows. But what we have noticed is that the requirement for the Windows is coming very rare. Okay, only very rarely these applications related to Windows are being changed. So the Jenkins worker node 3 is always sitting idle. That means you are wasting the resources on your AWS instance. Now you can say that okay, I can always go back and turn down this EC2 instance, or stop this EC2 instance only when it is required. But you never know when is it required, right? Or you can configure an auto scaling group. Okay, but even if you're configuring auto scaling group, then again you at least need to have one worker node, and you don't know which requirement is coming to you, whether it's a Windows application, whether it's a Linux application, Node.js application, you don't know. So you have all of these challenges with configuring worker nodes which are EC2 instances. So to solve this problem, in today's class, what we are going to see is we are going to see the latest approach, that is using Jenkins with Docker as agents. That means the Jenkins pipelines or the Jenkins stages, what we will do is we will try to run this Jenkins pipeline on Docker containers. So everybody knows what is the advantage of Docker containers, right? So if you are using Docker containers, they are very light in weight against virtual machines. So if you are using a Docker container, let's say tomorrow somebody comes here and says that, oh, okay, I'm using Node.js 15, upgrade to Node.js 16. Then you have to log into the worker node, change the Node.js to 16. Then again, there can be conflicting packages, like, one team in worker node might say that I want to use Node.js 15, and the other team using worker node 1, they might want to say that, okay, I want to use Node.js 16. So this problem can be solved by containers, because containers can be anytime created, destroyed, they can be upgraded. You just have to modify the Docker file and then you can use any container that you'd want, right? So, and most of the default containers, like, if you want a Node.js container, you don't even have to write a Docker file. You can directly use that from Docker Hub or somewhere. So that's why the containers usage for Docker, only if your applications are light in weight. Like let's say your application is a database application, then in some cases this container approach might not work. But to have a good resume or to have a good project in your resume, always try to implement this as well. Okay, or keep this as your first approach, so that you can say that we have used Docker as agent in our Jenkins project setup, and we found this as very useful in terms of cost and also in terms of efficiency and spinning up and tearing down the Docker containers. Perfect. Now this is the architecture that I wanted to explain you, and in today's class we will see the approach to, and I'll also explain you how to configure this Docker containers and how to use Docker as agent. It's going to be very simple, don't worry about it. Perfect. So now what we need to do is that we have Jenkins installed and we are also able to access Jenkins. To configure Docker, first of all, you have to have Docker installed on the same machine. I mean, right now in this class, I'm only going to use one EC2 instance. So I'm not going to create multiple EC2 instances. So what I'll do is I'll use the same instance where Jenkins is installed, and then install Docker on this machine. So for installing Docker, again, you can follow my document and you can directly copy the steps. That is, firstly, you apt install docker.io, right? So let me copy the commands from here itself. You don't have to do sudo apt update one more time if you have already done. So I'll just say sudo apt install docker.io. So what I'm doing, I'm installing Docker on the same machine. You can also install on a different machine, but you have to configure that machine as a slave. Okay, so once I do it, what is the thing? I mean, you also have to ensure that the Docker daemon. So if you know about Docker, Docker typically runs on a daemon process. That's a single process or single source of truth for Docker. And this daemon process by default is not accessible to other users. So I've installed Docker using root. So only root user has access to this daemon. So I have to grant access to this Docker daemon. So to do that, what I'll do is Jenkins basically comes with a user called Jenkins user. I'll grant the access to Jenkins user as well as the Ubuntu user as well, just in case you want to use Ubuntu user. So I have documented both of them. Firstly, I'm switching to the root user using sudo hyphen, and then user mod is used to grant access to Jenkins. Like I'm just making it part of the Docker group. So Docker installation creates a group called Docker, and whoever wants access to this Docker daemon, or whoever wants to create containers, or whoever wants to access the Docker, they should be part of the Docker group. So I'm just making them part of the Docker group, and I am restarting the Docker daemon. So it is done. Now, if you see here, I can switch to Jenkins user. What I'll do is switch user Jenkins. So right now I'm in Jenkins user. Jenkins user is by default created when you are installing Jenkins software. If I try to do, what is the docker hello world command? You can simply say docker run hello world. This will ensure that your Docker is installed and the user has access to Docker. Like if you see here, right now it is saying that, okay, the daemon does not have access. I mean, Jenkins does not have access to the daemon. Let us see what is happening. Let me just log out to this user, and let me again grant the access. Maybe I fumbled with the command. Let me say user mod -ag, Docker is the group, and then Jenkins is the user. Let me see if I granted the required access or not. Switch user hyphen Jenkins, and let me say Docker run hello world. Yes. So if you see here, maybe the daemon was getting restarted because I used the restart command as well. Maybe the daemon was getting restarted, or maybe I clicked on the wrong command, one of these things, but never mind. So now Jenkins user is also able to create the containers or run the containers. That is what the requirement was. Okay. So if you look at the document, grant Jenkins user and Ubuntu user permissions to Docker daemon. Why did I grant to Ubuntu user as well? Because some people might want to use Jenkins with the Ubuntu user, or they might run into some issues. So instead I said, okay, grant Ubuntu user as well. Now the other thing that you have to do is, because Jenkins sometimes, okay, it does not happen every time. Sometimes Jenkins might not pick up these changes. So just restart your Jenkins. Okay, so to restart your Jenkins, just go to your Jenkins URL, click on / and just type restart. Okay, then you will see a pop-up called, are you sure you want to restart Jenkins? Just say yes. Okay, so your Jenkins is restarted. The reason why I'm doing is sometimes Jenkins might not pick up the changes, or your Jenkins might be created a long time and there might be some caching. So it is a good practice to restart your Jenkins, or whenever you install some Jenkins plugins, you will anyways restart your Jenkins so that you don't have to do it now. Anything is fine. So I'll just wait for the Jenkins instance to come up. Again, it will not take much time. If you see here, it hardly took 2 seconds. Now log into your Jenkins. So if you did not create the password previously, it would be difficult for you. So always create your password, user ID and password. Right. Now we are done with installing Docker here, right? So we install Docker here. Now the next step that you would do is once you install Docker, the other thing that you have to do is you have to install the Docker plugin inside this Jenkins. Okay, so why you have to install Docker pipeline plugin is to run Docker as agent. Jenkins should understand that, okay, whenever I'm executing a job, I have to make sure that if the user provides in the Jenkins file to run this specific job on Docker, I need to have the configuration. So that's the reason why you will install the Docker pipeline, so that Jenkins will execute your pipelines on Docker agent if the required configuration is provided in the Jenkins file. So again, let me come here, click on dashboard. You will see manage Jenkins. Click on manage Jenkins. Once you click on manage Jenkins, so if you're using old version of Jenkins, you will see manage nodes. If you're using new version of Jenkins, you will see manage nodes and clouds. So click on manage nodes and clouds. Clouds. After that, what you will do is you have to, sorry, my bad. Go to manage Jenkins and you have to go to manage plugins, not manage nodes. Sorry for that. Just click on manage plugins and install the Docker pipeline plugin. Okay, so search for Docker pipeline plugin in the available plugins section. Again, just to mention that everything is part of the document. If you're not able to follow the video, you can also follow my GitHub repository where I have provided all these details. Okay, so fork or clone the repository or start the repository. So Docker pipeline. So this is the Docker pipeline plugin. Either you can click on install without restart or download now and install after restart. Anything is fine. Okay. But what you need to do is once these plugins are installed, there are three plugins that are getting installed. Okay. It said downloaded successfully, will be activated during your next boot, that is during your next start or restart. So that's the reason why again you need to restart your Jenkins. Okay, so don't get frustrated why you are restarting Jenkins too many times. So it is required. If you are not restarting your Jenkins, your changes might not get reflected, and somewhere down the line you run into some issue and you never understand what is the issue. So that's why always try to restart the Jenkins. So like you see, it will not take much time. It will hardly take some 5 to 10 seconds. So don't worry about it. Perfect. Again, I'll just provide the password and username. Now everything is configured and installed. So we can proceed with writing our first Jenkins pipeline. Okay, so for the viewers, let's say somebody is very new to Jenkins, what you need to do is just click on new item. Okay, then there are multiple ways of creating Jenkins pipelines. So you can create a freestyle project, you can create a pipeline project, multi-configuration project, multi-branch pipeline. Organization folder is just a folder that you want to create. But why you have so many varieties of it? So if if you go back 5 years or 10 years, there was only freestyle project. Okay, all that you can do was only a freestyle project where you provide everything as part of your I'll show you. Okay, so if I just have to show you this one, if you click on the freestyle project, so everything can be provided in the input boxes. Okay, so Jenkins used to provide these boxes where it explains you, if Git, then provide the Git details here. If you want to provide anything else, you can provide all the details here. But what is happening, or the biggest drawback of this approach, like even you might find this very comfortable for the users, like let's say I'm a DevOps engineer, I have to do zero coding here, right? Everything is just a text boxes, and I can just provide the repository URL of my GitHub, or I can provide some credentials, everything as part of the checkboxes, which is very easy for me. But the problem is this is not a declarative approach, right? So what do I mean by declarative approach is this approach cannot be shared with the team members. Let's say if you're using a freestyle project and tomorrow morning somebody has modified or you want to only modify it by sending it by your peer review. Like if you're writing a calculator application in Python and you want to modify the addition functionality, what you do is you would raise a pull request on GitHub and some of your peer will review it. But in this approach, the major drawback is that it cannot go through all of this workflow, which is a workflow that is followed by most of the tools. So to overcome this process, and there are other drawbacks as well, I'm just explaining you one drawback. So to overcome all of these problems, Jenkins has come up with a pipeline approach. Now, what is pipeline approach? So if I just say first Jenkins job and let me select the pipeline. Okay, so in the pipeline approach, the biggest advantage is you can write a declarative or you can write a scripted pipelines. So using declarative or scripted pipelines, what happens is you can write your pipeline as code here. Like let's say I want to write a hello world, or I just want to build a Jenkins plus Maven application. So this is a draft. Like similarly, you can write your own stages and you can write your own steps, and you can put this entire thing in a Git repository or in a GitHub repository, and you can have it go through your peer reviews, or you can always extend it whenever a new plugin is written. You can simply modify the code, and it is very easy, right? Because we are all used to the code approach, or we are all used to storing the code in GitHub, getting through the review process, seeing if anything is wrong, and if you have any declarative model where you can see what is in your GitHub instead of logging into your Jenkins all the time, going to the specific job. If there are 100 jobs, you have to go to 100 jobs and see what is the configuration in each and every of this job. But instead, if you have things on GitHub or any version control system, you can see not only all the Jenkins files today, but you can also track the previous versions very easily, right? So that is the reason why we should always go with the pipeline approach. Like even if you're learning Jenkins today, don't start with the freestyle project, always start with the pipeline project itself. Now you might say that, okay, pipeline, I have to write all of these code in Groovy scripting. I don't know Groovy scripting. Don't worry. That is what I'm going to explain today. In today's topic, I'll try to make it as simple as possible. And even after that, if you have some problem, I'll also show you some tips and tricks. Okay, so firstly, what we will do is we'll start with the basic one in my GitHub repository, that is writing my first pipeline, right? So this folder, I have three Jenkins projects for you today, and the first one is my first pipeline. So my first pipeline, what does it say? A simple Jenkins pipeline to verify if Docker slave configuration or Docker agent configuration, actually it should be Docker agent. So if the Docker agent configuration is working as expected or not. So what I'm doing in this Jenkins file is, I am configuring Docker as agent. And then in stages, I'm just verifying if, the container has Node.js or not, because I'm using a Node.js container. So what is this pipeline? What is the syntax, and what is agent and stages? Don't worry. I'll try to explain you with a graphical representation or a diagrammatic representation. So if you see here, just give me 1 second. If you go back here, right? So in the previous class also we discussed about it, but I'll just take some time to explain for someone who is watching the video for the first time. So if you see here, Jenkins is all about picking up the code from your local development or in any version control system and delivering it to production or any staging environment or somewhere, where automating all the stages that are involved in between, right? So let's say if there are 10 stages, your job and responsibility is to automate 10 stages in Jenkins. So Jenkins acts as an orchestrator. Even if you look at the example here, Jenkins is providing a sample. Click on GitHub plus Maven. What it is doing is it is telling that there are multiple stages in this Jenkins, and the first stage is the build stage. Okay, so what it is doing in build stage, it is basically getting out the code from or checking out the code from GitHub. After that, it is executing a Maven target. Then it is verifying if the JUnit coverage is proper or not. And what it is doing is it is just storing this JUnit artifacts, right? So basically it gets some reports and it is trying to archive that artifact reports and archive the artifact jar or the var which is created as an end output of this build process. So this is one stage. But in Jenkins, as we talked in the previous class, there can be multiple stages, right? For example, here, where is that? My Jenkins pipeline. Yeah. So if you see here, there can be your SCM checkout, which we just talked about. Then there can be build. Let's say your application is Java application. So this stage might contain Maven, right? So you can build your application using Maven. Then you might have a test stage, and as part of test stage, you can run some functional testing, you can run some code quality testing, or you can integrate with some external code scanning or code security related tooling. Then you finally deploy this onto a Docker container, or you deploy it onto Docker Swarm, or you deploy it onto Kubernetes, whatever the platform that you would like to. And finally, once you store all of these test results, and once you store all of these artifacts, then you finally deliver the code or the application to customer, right? So this is the end to end, and these stages can increase, right? Here in this example there are 4 stages: stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. Depending upon organization to organization, the stages will increase, right? So the stages can increase, but the entire skeleton of your Jenkins pipeline is always the same. Like for example, if you look at the example that I provided here, so in this example I just have one stage, right? I said stages, and inside stages I said that this is a test stage, and there is only one step in the stage. Step is nothing but the commands that you want to execute, or you can split your stage into multiple steps if your stage is complicated. So I said there is only one stage, and inside the stage there is only one step. Let's see the example that Jenkins is providing. So here, what is happening? There is again one stage, but inside that one stage you have two different steps. So tomorrow, if you have 3 steps, what you will do is just you'll just write one more step, right? So you said steps here. You keep on increasing the steps, but the entire skeleton is same. Don't worry that okay, I'm very new to Groovy scripting. I don't know how Groovy scripting works. So just take any example. If you start working in an organization, you can look at the previous Jenkins files, or you can also take help here. Like I showed you, this is a Hello World program. So you can start learning from the Hello World. You can start learning from my repository, and there is also one more flexibility, that is Jenkins provide you pipeline syntax. So pipeline syntax is a very good utility. Let's say I don't know the syntax for checking out the code from GitHub. Like if you see here, what this project is doing here, where is this one? Like if you go back here, what GitHub plus Maven example project is doing is it is checking out the code from GitHub. Now you might say that Abhishek, I don't know syntax for this. Now how do I write this one? I know I can Google it, but is there any way? So the easy way is just go to this pipeline syntax and search for the option whatever you want to write. So here I want to write for Git. I want to check out code from Git. So it is saying, okay, just provide me the repository URL. So I'll say this is just a dummy one. Okay, I'll say github.com/argo-proj/argo-cd, let's say. And the branch name, I want to create Jenkins pipeline for main branch, for example, or let it be master branch. And finally, I can provide some credentials. I did not save any credentials in this Jenkins, but if there is some credentials that are stored, just run on generate pipeline script. So this is the script. You can just copy it and you can put it in a pipeline. After that, let's say I want to run couple of shell scripts. So what I need to do is I can search for shell script option here, search for shell script, and it will ask what are the shell scripts that you want to run. I'll say just cd to a folder called foo, and run a script called as hack test.sh. Okay. So just again run the pipeline script and it will give you how to use this as syntax in your Jenkins pipeline. So Jenkins has all of these things in the Jenkins Groovy code generator. So code generator is a utility that will be your first savior. So if you want to learn Jenkins, use this code generator for writing your Jenkins pipelines. Now, I've discussed a lot about this, how to write these Jenkins scripts, and what are some of the tips and tricks. Now, let us proceed with our pipeline, the first pipeline for the day, and I will show you how to execute this pipeline. All that you need to do is, because I already have a Jenkins file, you don't even have to write the Jenkins file and everything. Just go to this specific folder, okay? And what you will do is come to your first Jenkins job, okay? Remove everything. Say instead of pipeline script, say pipeline script from SCM. That is Instead of me writing the pipeline script, I want to pick up a pipeline script from source code management repository, that is GitHub repository. So Jenkins will say, okay, tell me what is the repository of that SCM. So here you can say, go to again this folder, and you can copy either from here or from the code section. You can say, okay, so this is my URL. After that, if you have any credentials, like mine is not a private repository, so I don't have any credentials. And then you can say, is your branch master or main? Let us see if it is master or main. So it is a main branch. Change the branch to main. Then what is the path? uh, is it present in the root? No, it is actually present inside a folder called my first pipeline. So what you'll do is copy this my first pipeline, okay, and append it in front of, like, prefix your Jenkins file with this one. So say my first pipeline slash Jenkins file. Now save this one. Okay, once you save this, you will start seeing the entire concept that I just told you. Like right now, there is only one EC2 instance. If you see here, there is only one EC2 instance. I don't have worker nodes. Now, where is this Jenkins pipeline going to be executed? Because I told you Jenkins master or EC2 instance is mostly used for the scheduling purpose. But now where is this pipeline going to run? So you will see the magic whenever when I run the build now option. So as I click on the build now option, what happens is this particular Jenkins will start looking like, firstly, of course, it will fetch the code from GitHub. Okay, so it said that, okay, I'm fetching the code from GitHub. This is all the Git commands that it is executing. And after that, if you see here, it is pulling an image called node colon 16 hyphen alpine. So firstly, try to see if there is any Docker container or if there is any Docker image on that specific node, okay, or on that Jenkins master. It did not find. So what it did is it tried to create one Jenkins, Docker image. It executed the entire pipeline. So the pipeline is very simple one. It just executes node hyphen version, because this is my first Jenkins pipeline where I just want to see if entire configuration is correct or not. That's it. I didn't want to do anything. So here I verified that my node version is correct. And what Jenkins is doing here is, this is the this is a very important thing. Once the execution is done, okay, once the entire pipeline is successful or the build is successful, Jenkins just said that delete the Docker container. Okay, so now if you see, like, this is my instance, right? If I come here and say Docker PS, you'll notice that there is no running container. And if I do Docker PS-A, you will see that, okay, so this is the hello world container that I just showed you, right, to verify the Docker installation. So you can ignore this one, because this is just something that I showed you for Docker installation. But there are no containers as well. That means Docker, what it did is, if we go back to the previous diagram, so Jenkins requested Docker to create one container. Okay, so using the Docker pipeline plugin that we configured, it talked to the Docker and it said, okay, can you give me one container so that I can execute my pipeline? That is a Node.js related application. Docker said, okay, I'll give you a container called C1. Now Jenkins executed this on C1, and as soon as the process is done, it just terminated the C1. Okay, so that means even though you see the diagram like this, but it is always that, there are no running containers at all. Only when there is a request, a container is created. Okay, so the actual diagram would be, only when there is a request, a container is created, right? So this is the approach. So this is how you are saving a lot of cost, and you are saving not just the cost. Okay, even if you say that, okay, my organization is not worried about the cost, but the major advantage is that if we go back to the VMs approach, you have a major challenge with managing the dependencies, upgrading these virtual machines. Like, let's say today you are using CentOS 7. So all of these worker nodes are CentOS 8. And tomorrow you want to upgrade all of these worker nodes to CentOS 9. So technically there has to be a DevOps team that is managing these worker nodes as well, right? And today you are using Node.js 14. Tomorrow you want Node.js 15. So somebody has to log into these virtual machines and they have to update the Node.js version. Any dependencies are there, they have to update the dependency versions as well. If there is any security related concerns, they have to update that packages, package.json, lot of things, right? Whereas if you look at my configuration here, only thing that you need to do is just go to this specific file, and from Node 16 Alpine, just change it to Node 17 Alpine. That's it. You just have to change two magical letters and your entire configuration is done. So this is the advantage of using Docker as agent. Now you might say that, okay, I'm expecting to write a big Jenkins pipeline, but you just shared me the steps to write a very simple one. But I'm actually interested in writing a big one. So the only difference that you would do is, right, you don't have to worry about anything. Just come here, keep adding stages. Okay, so this is one stage, right? What you would do after this is add one more stage, add one more stage. And instead of test stage, you might call this stage as deploy. And what you are doing in this specific stage is probably you are saying kubectl apply minus f a deployment.yaml file. Or probably you are adding one more step for sonar, you are adding one more step. So your Jenkins pipeline is never complicated unless you are not using right syntaxes, or unless you are not using proper semantics. No, I'm not going to stop it here, but actually I'm going to show you lot of other things. Like, okay, this is just a simple Jenkins pipeline. Now you understood how to do it. Okay, so if you are clear till now, just click on the like button. Also share your feedback to me in the comment section so that I understand. Okay, till this timestamp everybody is clear. Okay, I'm expecting things are clear right now. After this, let us see how to create a multi-stage, multi-agent job. Now, what is multi-stage and what is multi-agent? Don't worry about the name. So my intention is that, like in the previous example, I just showed you one Node.js application, how to deploy it. But many people are asking me that, Abhishek, in my architecture or in my current organization, we are using application with database, and we have a three-tier application. Basically, I have front end, I have back end, and I have database. Now, database related CICD has to be executed on, let's say, on a VM that has CentOS, whereas front end and back end applications has to be implemented on virtual machine that has Ubuntu. Okay, or that has Java installed, and in the backend I just want Oracle installed. Now how do I solve this problem, right? Because if you start using worker nodes, then this becomes very complicated, and during your interviews they are saying that, okay, this is not the right approach. So the right approach would be, okay, so to create multiple stages, and like here I said agent as none. If you look at the previous example, I said agent as Docker here, but here what I did is I said agent as none, and inside the stages I mentioned, like, okay, if it is a backend stage, okay, use Maven or use Java. Okay, and if it is front end, use Node or React. And if it is database related thing, use any image that has Oracle pre-installed in it. Or whenever a container is created, then it has Oracle or MySQL or anything that is already installed. So what you can do, if it is a three-tier architecture, okay, probably for front end you might be using Node.js, for back end you might be using Java with Maven, and for database, okay, so what I'll do is I'll just copy the things from here to here, and I'll add one more stage here. Oh, my bad. Okay, and here I'll say database, and the image I'll just change it to MySQL. Okay, so MySQL, let me call it as latest. Okay, I'll say MySQL latest. Never use latest, always use image that is required, the image tag that is required. But let's say MySQL colon latest, and inside the steps I'll run some MySQL related queries, or I'll do some DB related migrations, or I'll run some joint queries, or whatever is required here. Okay, so select, just for an example here, okay, select star from XYZ. Okay, so this is how you even manage multi-tier architecture applications. Okay, so you can run this pipeline again as is, do not save anything. Like, I'm just providing the skeletons. Like I told you, you can fork these repositories and you can play with your applications. Like, you can instead of Maven 3.8, you can just change it to 3.9, or you can use any dummy Java application and you can use the same pipeline. Okay, you don't have to change anything. Just bring some Java hello world code. You can find it anywhere in the internet. Just add that Java hello world code to this repository and run the Maven targets. Okay, and run the Node.js related things, like bring one Node.js dummy application and run the Node.js. You can build your own pipelines by using this repository as your skeleton. So now let me also try to execute this pipeline and show you. Now what should happen is, if you are executing this pipe, you should be able to see that two containers are created. Okay, like I told you, the containers will be deleted, but this time what I'll show you is using the terminal. Like whenever I start executing this pipeline, I'll show you that the containers are created dynamically, and inside one container Maven targets are running, and inside one container your Node.js related targets are running. So in real life scenarios, instead of Maven hyphen version, you would actually use mvn clean install, mvn package, or any Maven related targets. And here, instead of node hyphen hyphen version, you'd be using something called as npm run or npm install, or any of the targets related to npm. Right? So let me use the same Jenkins job. Okay. So instead of creating a new Jenkins job, what I'll do is I'll use the same Jenkins job, but I'll try to modify the SCM related targets. That is here, the repository name will be the same, but the folder of my Jenkins file is the only one that will change. Okay. What is the name of the folder here? Multi-stage, multi-agent. Why I'm calling it as multi-agent? Because here I'm using multiple Docker containers, not this one here. Yeah. So I'm using multiple Docker containers dedicated to the usage. Like if you want for front end one Docker container, for back end one Docker container, and for DB related one Docker container. Let me save it. Okay. And let me execute it. So as soon as I execute it, you will see that a new Jenkins pipeline is running. Now let me run Docker PS and show you what is happening. Okay, till now it is not created. Let us give it one more few more seconds. So till now I think it is just picking up the code from the GitHub repository. I think now it is getting created. Yeah, if you see here, the Maven related container is created, and after that you will also see see here, the node related container is created. That means your first job got executed, right? And then sorry, your first stage got executed, and after that your second stage also got executed. That means both your stages are executed, and if you see here now, the Docker containers are terminated. Isn't it amazing? So this should be your organization architecture, right? If your organization is using VM based approach, you should always look at migrating them to this Docker container based approach. You should suggest this architecture in your organization, so that you not only save the cost, but you are also saving a lot of time for your organization. Because if you look at the legacy jobs, okay, let's say here instead of the Docker containers, we are using VMs. So what will happen is, you are technically maintaining two VMs. So you are maintaining a VM for Maven, you are maintaining a VM for Node.js. And whenever the Node.js version is increased, you have to go to that VM and you have to increase that Maven version in that VM. And if the Node.js version is increased, you have to increase that. If the base image of the EC2 instance is changed, you either have to terminate that instance, create a new one, or inside that instance itself you have to update. So there is a lot of maintenance activity for the DevOps engineers, and using this approach we are avoiding that maintenance activity, right? I hope the things are clear till now. So this is how I mean, I just showed you two examples. One is your first Jenkins pipeline, and then you have your multi-stage, multi-agent. Now the assignment would be, I'll be interested if somebody can enhance this one and create a pull request, like, add one more folder, fork this repository, add one more folder, and show me that, Abhishek, I just use your examples, and what I did was, instead of Maven -FN version and Node -FN version, I actually created an application. Like, it can be simple Hello World as well. So submit a Java Hello World application, submit a Node.js Hello World application, and try to execute the targets. Instead of MVN -FN version, just change it to MVN install, MVN clean install, or MVN package. And here just try to change it to npm install. And it can be, hardly it will take 5 minutes. Okay, you can just find search for, even ask ChatGPT to give me a Java Hello World Java class, and put that in the repository and try to execute using Jenkins pipeline. Now we'll come to the complicated topic for today, that is how to set up CICD. We'll use the CICD flow. In this case, I also wrote an application. I mean, I just used an existing application. I did not write it. So this is my existing Python application. Okay, if you watched my previous Kubernetes videos, we used a to-do application. So this is my to-do application, and what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to implement this architecture for you. Okay, so many people have asked me this one. Okay, Abhishek, how do I do this? Like, I want to deploy my artifacts onto Kubernetes directly. I want to create a Jenkins pipeline which does end to end, right from checking out the code to deploying the artifacts onto Kubernetes. So I have seen many people instead of Argo CD using Ansible here. Okay, so I'm not against the approach of using Ansible, or I'm not like saying that everybody has to use Argo CD. But the point is, Argo CD is a modern day continuous delivery, like it's a declarative continuous delivery application. And if you use Argo CD, it has the it's a tool that is developed for continuous delivery. Okay, Ansible is a configuration management tool. Uh, I mean, by luck or by any ways, it can actually deploy the code onto your Kubernetes clusters. But Argo CD can not only just deploy, but it can also monitor the state inside your Kubernetes cluster. Let's say in your GitHub. Okay, what you are doing is you are saying that I want foo dot I mean your application is foo and you have version 3 of your foo application. So if you are using Ansible just deploys whatever you are storing it in Helm charts or whatever you are storing in the deployment.yaml files. It will just pick up and it will just deploy onto your Kubernetes cluster. But if you are using Argo CD or Flux or Spinnaker, any of the continuous delivery declarative continuous delivery tools or GitOps tools, what they do is they will ensure that the state is always the same because they are Kubernetes controllers. So they are actually deployed in your Kubernetes cluster itself. Now, without wasting any time, I'll show you how to do this. So this is a simple Python based application. So this is a to-do application. And if you deploy the application, you will see the application like this. So it will just have a simple UI. And I also explained the implementation, everything in the previous examples. But if you want to try it by yourself, just run this Docker file. All that you need to do is just say docker run minus it and the Docker file. It will run the application on your local host, and you can directly see the application on your local host like this. Now, the idea or the point is to implement the entire thing in Jenkins pipeline and to deploy that onto Kubernetes cluster. So if you want to watch the video from zero to the end to end, I already have the video on my YouTube channel. So I put the link here where I'll do the exact same thing. Like, I'll create a Jenkins pipeline that will watch for GitHub repository. And then, I'll try to build the application, that is the Python application. I'll try to put this Python application artifact, that is a Docker container. I'll try to push them to GitHub, and I'll also parallelly update the deployment.yaml file inside the GitHub. And Argo CD, if you see here, the arrow is actually pointing towards GitHub. Okay, or it is pointing towards Jenkins, not from Jenkins to Argo CD. That means Argo CD will watch for any change in GitHub. It understands that, okay, there is a new version of to-do application, and it will automatically pick up and deploy the application onto Kubernetes. So the entire thing, I think it's a 30 minutes video, and the entire video is present here. But today I'll explain you how to do it. Like, what is the application flow, how to write Jenkins file for it. So like I explained, you can also choose Docker container as agent. All that you need to do is simply agent hyphen Docker and provide the Python version. Like we provided Node.js and Maven version, you can provide Docker image is equals to Python 3. Once you're done with it, what I'm firstly doing is I'm writing a checkout stage. Inside this checkout stage, I have a single step that is checking out the Python code from SCM, that is source code management. After that, we are trying to build Docker. I mean, I'm trying to actually build a Docker image for this application. Like I mentioned you, it's just Docker build, and then I'll push this Docker image to Docker Hub. And finally, what I'll do is I'll try to update the deployment.yaml. Okay, so the deployment.yaml is a Kubernetes deployment file which is present here. Okay, so inside the deployment folder, I have a Kubernetes deployment.yaml and service.yaml. So I'll update this deployment.yaml with the new version that is created. That is, instead of version 1, let's say the build number is 2. What I'll do is Abhishek fi hyphen to do hyphen app colon build 35 or number 35. And what Argo CD will do is, okay, so I noticed that there is change in this deployment.yaml, and for Argo CD, Git is always a single source of truth. right? So what Argo CD will do is it will watch for this specific change. Let me go back to that diagram. Yeah. So what Argo CD will do is it will notice a change in Git repository and it will deploy the applications onto Kubernetes cluster. So you can directly implement this one. Just like I always say, just clone my repository and try to run this Jenkins file, and Argo CD configuration you can watch from this video. It will hardly take you 5 minutes. You just have to install a Kubernetes cluster. It can be Minikube or it can be K3s or anything, and install Argo CD as an operator or as a simple binary, and make sure your Argo CD is watching this repository. I showed you the exact steps in the video that I mentioned here. So you can follow the video as is. Okay. So with that, you will be able to set up the end-to-end Jenkins pipeline configuration setup, and your deployment will be taking on the Kubernetes cluster. Okay. So this is about the Kubernetes delivery or Kubernetes CI/CD process. Now we'll move to the final topic for today, that is Jenkins interview questions. Okay, so I already covered the Jenkins interview questions again on my video, but I'll explain you on brief what can be the interview questions on Jenkins. So the first and foremost question that people would be interested is to understand your CI/CD process. Okay, so you can explain the CI/CD process that I showed you here. So you can just tell the exact same process, but you can say depending upon your organization. Let's say you're using an Android or mobile application. So you can slightly modify the steps here and say that for the build language, I'm using Android build process, or for Java applications, I'm using Maven. For for Node.js applications, I'm using npm. So depending upon your application to application, you can define the stages, but the standard flow would be you explain your CI/CD process as what we are doing is we are firstly checking out the code from SEM, then we are building the application, then we test it for code vulnerabilities, code scanning, static code analysis, SAST, DAST, and then you can finally say that we store the artifacts and we deploy them onto your Kubernetes cluster. For deployment, we use Argo CD, or if you are familiar with Ansible, you can also say for deployment we use Ansible. But if you're talking about Argo CD, probably they'll think that okay, you are using advanced tooling. So this will be your first question. That is, explain the CI/CD workflow in your organization. Once that is done, then people will ask you like, how do you handle issues in your worker nodes? Let's say you have your Jenkins jobs that are running on your worker nodes. So how do you handle these things? Your worker node is going down, or your worker node is not responsive. So what you will say is that I'll log into this worker node, try to understand the problem. I'll try to get the thread dumps, or I'll try to look into the worker node's health. Okay, you can say that I wrote a simple Python application where it will always monitor the worker node's health, and in case the CPU or RAM is going out of limit, okay, for some reason the CPU or the RAM is full, it will send me alerts when the CPU reached 80% or when the RAM reached 80%, so that we take immediate action. Or you can say we implemented auto scaling on the EC2 instances. But the best way is the approach that we learned today. You can say that, okay, in our case, we are actually using Docker agents, and we only spin up containers when there is a Jenkins job that is running. So in that case, in that way, we ensure that, always our agents or the Jenkins is never down. Okay, it can always accept the traffic. Then comes your Jenkins administrative related questions, where people will usually ask you like, how do you install Jenkins, or how do you expose the Jenkins port to external world? All of the questions related to these things. So if you want to learn more questions about Jenkins, okay, what are the interview questions that people can ask you on Jenkins and specifically CI/CD? I'll put the links in the description as well, so that you can watch those videos. So I'll have two links for you. One is how to set up Argo CD with this existing pipeline. So the pipeline will work exactly as is. Like, it will check out the code from once you run the Jenkins pipeline, it will check out the code, it will build the code, and it will update the Kubernetes manifest back into the GitHub. And only thing that you need to do is watch this video that I'm showing you here, and configure Argo CD on your Minikube cluster or any cluster, so that your entire setup is done. If you have multiple Kubernetes clusters, you can configure Argo CD to deploy to multiple as well. So finally, like I told you, if you want to follow the entire documentation or if you want to follow the entire video in the future, just clone this repository or fork this repository so that you will have them handy. I hope you enjoy the video. If you like the video, click on the like button. If you have any comments or feedback for me, do put that in the comment section. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Abhishek Veeramalla. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next video.